Welcome to the Not Old Better Show. I'm your host, Paul Vogelsang. If you're watching the new PBS series Soundbreaking, like we are in our house, you know this is something to behold. If not, well, either way, we've got a treat for you with today's guest. Soundbreaking is the brilliant, spanking new documentary from PBS in association with Sir George Martin and is produced by Show of Force. We're joined today via Skype with Show of Force executive and one of Soundbreaking's producers, Joshua Bennett. More on Joshua in just a moment. But again, if you're watching Soundbreaking, which is currently airing on PBS, check your local listings, you'll agree it is well worth it. There is just something to be said for hearing that heavenly chorus of voices as the song God Only Knows by the Beach Boys plays, or Neil Young's voice on Don't Let It Bring You Down, and Amy Winehouse, or Sly Stone, or Bonnie Raitt, Little Richard, Fleetwood Mac, the Staple Singers, or any of the other 160 musicians, artists, and other music professionals, all of whom extol the music recording innovation tracing a sonic revolution. The rare footage, the stories the artists tell, the music, and the never-before-seen creative process push along Soundbreaking's storytelling, emphasizing music's ability to carry us back and forward at the same moment. Trust me when I tell you, you'll never hear these songs the same way again. Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Joshua Bennett. We're with Joshua Bennett, who's the Executive Vice President of Show of Force, one of the producers behind Soundbreaking, an 8-part event television series that's airing now on PBS, and it traces this ongoing sonic revolution in the music industry, and each hour-long episode tackles a different topic: vocals, electrification of instruments, dance songs, the artistry of sampling. I've seen 5 of the 8 episodes, and I'm really excited about this series, Joshua. I just love getting the behind-the-scenes look into all of these advances, and I have to kind of start at the beginning with you and just say I was really just thrilled to see Sir George Martin's involvement. He really seemed to serve as a driving force in all of this. Is that kind of the interaction that you guys had with him?
Yeah, I mean, this really is, the brainchild of Sir George Martin. He really wanted to tell the story of really the magic of recorded music and what happens in the recording studio when you bring together great artists and great producers and the people who actually make the records, and how that happens and how that changes what music really is at a very fundamental level. And I think Sir George looked at his catalog of work with the Beatles and how influential that was, and he saw this bigger story that had not really been told yet, that the way that recorded music has transformed through technology has really transformed music itself. It's shaped how we experience music. It's really, I think, shown us new sounds, new ways of thinking about music, and totally new sonic directions and genres that have been born out of that magic that happens in the studio.
I want to play a clip from the Soundbreaking episode number 2, entitled Painting with Sound. And we're going to hear, actually, George Martin talk a little bit about his role in the studio. We'll also hear from Ringo Starr of the Beatles, and that'll be very apparent. And we'll hear from George Martin's son, Giles Martin, about his father's efforts in the studio and what he did to really change this idea of sound recording.
Take 6.
How could I dance? She won't dance.
When we first met George, we loved him because he took a chance on us. No one else would take a chance with a name like that. And you come from Liverpool, not a chance in hell.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You can cut, you can edit, obviously you can slow down or speed up your tape, you can put in backwards time. And this is the kind of thing you can do on recording, which you obviously couldn't possibly do it live, because it is, in fact, making up music as you go along.
Yesterday, I'm in G, but it'll be in F. It goes E minor to A 7th to D minor.
My dad was
Ready?
trying to look for influences outside of the realm of pop music. They wanted to push the boundaries of sound. They wanted to create something new all of the time. He was open to anything. There were no rules. The only rules were to make great sounding records.
Okay, man. yesterday. All my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay.
He said, what do you think then? I said, well, there's nothing we can do to put on top of this that's going to make it more beautiful, except perhaps some strings.
Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday.
It really spans music styles and genres beyond George Martin and the Beatles. Of course, Paul McCartney takes part in all this, Tom Petty, Roger Waters, Roger Daltrey, Joni Mitchell, Debbie Harry, producers like Rick Rubin. It really is just a list that goes on and on. I was so impressed in seeing everybody. How did you guys get everybody to take part in all of this?
No, we've talked about how, it's really a cast of artists and producers that I think probably will never be assembled on the scale that it was for this series. And a lot of that credit goes right back to Sir George. I mean, he said from the very beginning, I don't want this to be just a series about my work and the Beatles and celebrating what we did. This is really a much bigger story than me. This involves so many artists, so many, iconic songs, so many great producers. And he really wanted it to be more of this approach that would capture just the range of artists and styles of music and types and really place things on equal footing, not just put the Beatles on a pedestal, but talk about, everything from dance music to soul to hip hop to electronic music to country, really run the gamut. And so I think the ball started to roll with Sir George's involvement, and he was able to really tap some big names and big artists who would come out and really sit down, like Sir Paul or Sir Elton John, or numerous others. And then the process was really then going and really getting the buy-in from a lot of the big record labels and getting them to say, yes, we want you to use our music in this series, because that's the other thing I think that sets this series apart. You really hear all of these classic songs, whether it's a great Beatles song or a Rolling Stones material or Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Wonder or, newer artists like Beyonce and Adele. You really get to hear all this music, which is quite a challenge when it comes down to just the actual licensing of stuff. So I think it kind of early on gathered a lot of steam when we really got big artists and then got the labels to say, let's get behind and support this because this is a great story. And this is really about celebrating music and the artists who made that music.
One of the things that I noticed in watching it that I loved, and you just are alluding to this just a moment ago in saying that you're playing a lot more of the song than just a snippet. It seems like you guys have actually licensed the entire song because that's being played in a lot of parts. And really, that's a wonderful piece because you really get the whole story then.
Yeah, well, I think also, what was important to us was I think there's a lot of documentaries that are done about music. And I think a lot of times what we felt was that you get a lot of talking that doesn't really give you that moment to hear and feel and internalize the music. And so when we set out to do this, we knew, we wanted to be able to play songs for more than a minute or, closer to their full length. Because I think when you hear it in this new context, it makes it fresh again. And I think it brings back that kind of love you have of music. It brings back the associations with a certain song or an artist, or it turns you on to new artists and new songs that maybe you hadn't really thought about listening or, did not appeal to you previously. And we've had that feedback from a lot of people who've seen the show that they hear it. It's almost like when you hear, in episode 2, God Only Knows, and Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys singing. Yeah, we all know that song, but we had the opportunity to really set it up and then play the song in a moment where you've learned new things about it, and then you hear it, and I think you appreciate it in a different way. So that kind of model, I think, is what we really set to do, in sequence after sequence across the show.
I love music, and you have to fit into that category too, I would imagine, and you and the rest of the team. And there are a fair number of music documentaries out there. I have to tell you though, there aren't a whole bunch of documentaries that show Mary Ford, Les Paul, and the use of the multi-track recording device that they share. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because that black and white footage that you bring in, it's almost instructional, and then you have Jeff Beck kind of talking about it at the same time. It makes this really great kind of combination of these two kind of eras. So tell that story about Les Paul and Mary Ford.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great moment in the show. Jeff Beck says the first time he heard that, his mother told him, "Oh, you can't listen to that music. That's fake music. They're not really playing it." And of course, Jeff Beck, I think the rebel in him said, "No, I love that music. I want to hear more of that." And I think it's really this watershed moment where Les Paul, who obviously made the electric guitar, is tinkering in his shop and figures out a way to take an old magnetic tape machine and start looping multiple takes. And he sets up 4 different, tape reels and is able to then dump those down to another machine. And so suddenly, instead of what had previously been a recording process where you brought the band or the artist in, you had the musicians assemble, you had everything played live, and you want to capture that live sound, suddenly recording becomes, let's record these things one at a time, and let's manipulate them, and let's play with how they come in. And it's the beginning of, I think, this whole process then of how suddenly music is not just about the performance. Recorded music becomes about what new sounds, what new combinations, what things can I do, what new ways of manipulating and transforming these sounds can I apply to make the sound even better and sound a little different. And so I think Les Paul really starts this whole journey off. And it's great to hear, somebody like Jeff Beck, who is a consummate musician, amazing guitar player, really recognizing that that's where so much of the real magic is, in that ability to take this music now and to play with it and to create new things that maybe nobody had ever heard of before.
I also thought it was really educational, and I imagine, hearing you kind of talk and doing a little bit of research on you, that this was very intentional too, that you really kind of broke up this timeline to kind of teach us about how music is almost influencing generation after generation, but might skip a generation. For example, with Joni Mitchell, you talk a little bit about her work and how it connects her to Questlove and to Sly and the Family Stone, one of my all-time favorites. And then you kind of bring back the Beatles and Sir George Martin. And so it really is this interesting way of using that technique to kind of tell the story. Was that intentional on your part to kind of do it in just that manner?
Yeah, I think we really were deliberately setting out to not make this a chronological story. We didn't want it just to be a straight ahead march through time. I think music is, such a conversation. It's a communicative art form more than any. And I think the juxtaposition of putting different artists side by side, like putting a Joni Mitchell next to a Sly Stone, it's showing you that they might be coming from totally different places, but there are similar sensibilities. There are similar goals and desires at play that really connect them in this, big sort of story that's spanning decades and spanning so many artists. So for us, it was really about finding those compelling themes, those moments of human connection that really allow you then to make these jumps into different styles of music in different eras. And I think that's really more rewarding, because the things that it reveals are these common grounds, these connections that maybe at first glance you don't really see, but I think then you feel it and you hear it and you really appreciate it.
It really drove that point home to me, and I really thought that was a wonderful way of kind of telling this kind of on a story basis that was unusual and that makes it so much more meaningful. We're with Joshua Bennett, who is part of Show of Force, one of the producers of Soundbreaking, the new series that is on now on PBS, and we'll have links to where you can find it. Certainly it will be available at all of the online places, but Joshua Bennett and his team have just created this wonderful project and event. I think the other thing that just immediately jumps out at you, Joshua, is this combination that you bring. I mentioned Sly and the Family Stone, and then there's Hendrix and Boston and Phil Spector and his early kind of original combo. Some of those really are my favorites. I wonder if there's one that stands out for you at the top of your list. What was almost your favorite song or story about all these new sounds?
I think for me, my favorite happens in episode 4, Going Electric, and we're talking about the music of Stevie Wonder. And I don't want to give away too much, or I guess I could give away some because it's already out there. But the story of how Stevie Wonder starts to incorporate synthesizers into his music, and Stevie going from being such an incredible artist already at Motown, but really more in that classic soul, Motown sound. Here's this crazy record by these guys, Bob Margouleff and Malcolm Cecil, and it's Zero Time is the name of the record. He hears that and he says, wow, what are these crazy sounds? What is this? I want this in my music. And they had been experimenting with early synthesizers, and they built this massive, huge, giant conglomeration of all these synthesizers. And, Stevie went and sought them out, and them working together, these two mad scientists and the incredible Stevie Wonder, created the next, what was called the golden era of Stevie's records, those 5 records from like 1972 up until Songs in the Key of Life, where, record after record had incredible song and hit after incredible song, and Stevie, got all of these Grammys and really kind of put this output out that was phenomenal. And a lot of that was, due to him being able to explore these new sounds, find these new textures and colors using the synthesizers. So I think it's a story that brings together all of the kind of elements of the types of stories we are trying to tell in Soundbreaking.
And we might never have had a Songs in the Key of Life or Intervisions or Talking Book or some of this music had it not been for just almost that chance, meeting between this kind of this very obscure band and then a very mainstream artist.
Yeah, and I think and again, those are the kinds of stories you find, like that really creating these songs, creating this music is always this collaborative effort. And it's never just about a single artist or, a single vision, but it's about these different elements and players and people coming together and working together and collaborating. And then through that, I think collaboration, they break new ground. And I feel like that's a big takeaway from the series, is that there is always this back and forth between these artists and producers who really, through that working together, I think, are able to create some of the most memorable and iconic songs and art that now we all know and love.
And that really drove a lot of hip-hop, very much influenced by some of that synthesizer work that was coming from almost a scientific standpoint. I think Ringo at one point said the recording studio turned into a bunch of people with lab coats on, almost scientists and engineers.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that is the another kind of a point that is very important to us in the series too. It's that it's, I think, for people to understand like Sgt. Pepper's and what they were doing, the Beatles in the studio and Sir George's work, I think that's more clearly recognized for the brilliance and the really incredible achievement that it was. People point to Sgt. Pepper's and Revolver as Beatles records that really changed the game. But I think in the same way, people are only just now coming to talk about early hip hop and what was happening with sampling technology in the 70s and 80s as this kind of other watershed moment where when you stop and you look at what they were doing with turntables, with early samplers, and I'm talking about artists like the Sugar Hill Gang or like Run DMC or the Beastie Boys or Public Enemy, like what these pioneers were doing really became a blueprint for how so much music is made today. When you stop and think about the influence of computers and of sampling technology on music creation, pretty much any kind of song you're hearing on the radio these days is using some element of sampled sound, some element of, bringing together, other sourced sounds or textures or clips and putting those into a track. It's kind of like we're living in this moment where almost everything is sampled in some way. And so I think our take on that is let's not just tell a story about hip hop, but let's look at how this technology here really shaped this art form, and then how that then migrated into these other genres.
I don't want to give anything away either, but for my audience, you have to see Meryl Garbus, I think that's how you pronounce it, from
Yes.
Tune Yards, use this foot pedal. It's just amazing. And my audience will also remember Neil Young and Don't Let It Bring You Down. That music is there, but it's really nicely paired with some of the stuff that Amy Winehouse was doing. And so you kind of bring us current on, kind of several fronts, hip-hop and kind of this new way of producing music in lots of different places, and then comparing that to some of these artists. One of the other things that I thought was just fantastic was Imogen Heap's kind of acoustic layering. That's really just an interesting thing to see. I'd never seen that before, but it really is wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see that, and it's incredible to see what she's able to do just by layering her voice. And Imogen Heap is an artist who's always looking forward for new technologies and sounds and ways to present her music. And so she was really generous with her time and allowing us to film that very cool demo that she did of layering her vocals. But I think then you look at it in the context of that episode where we stop and we talk about Fleetwood Mac and the record Tusk, and we talk about Pink Floyd, and you kind of see what they were doing with layering tracks in the studio. She's kind of now taken that to another direction, another place. And I think that the torch kind of is being passed. And I think that's really what we kind of look at in each of the shows, is that kind of passing of the torch to a new artist who now can take and build on what's been done before, but maybe bring something a little new, a little more specific to them as an individual and artist, and then, create something that sounds new and fresh, but still really appealing.
Yeah, and we started with George Martin and the Beatles, and really one of the opening songs of one of the segments that you go into some really wonderful detail about is Tomorrow Never Knows, and that's got to be inspirational for a lot of these younger musicians that may not even be aware of that music, or might be aware of it, but might not know kind of some of the details behind it.
Well, I mean, talk about inspiration. I think one of the highlights was being at Abbey Road when Giles Martin, Sir George's son and a great producer in his own right, opened up the boards and let us listen to the original tracks of Tomorrow Never Knows. And you really do hear this song that, I think people are familiar with, but maybe haven't spent a lot of time with in the Beatles catalog. You hear how everything that they're doing on that record is looking ahead 40, 50 years, and they're sampling, they're looping, they're mixing things in odd ways, they're playing with speed. So it's kind of this almost like a Pandora's box of a song that once you open it up, you hear all of these things that are little revelations. And, as you said, for me, and I think all the team here as music lovers, it's those kinds of moments, those surprises, which are exciting, and it makes you want to go back and listen, and it makes, I've heard people say, want to write new material, new songs. They want to go and do their own, multi-tracking or their own looping of their vocals or voice. So I think, this is kind of this vehicle just to celebrate music, but also to get inspired and get people excited about music again.
Thank you so much for joining us. I just have two quick questions for you. I wonder if you would talk for just a second about kind of two things. There are artists that we don't get to see that honestly, may be surprising to some audience members, but there are probably reasons for that, but maybe there are even future seasons that can come. So maybe tell us if there's going to be a season 2. That'd be great to know. And then I guess the other thing is, tell us finally about the outreach and the educational kind of initiative that's going on around Soundbreaking.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of your first question on a season 2, we've been in conversations. I think, everybody is interested in it. I think PBS is open to it, and it's just a matter of putting together all the pieces, because this was a very enormous effort. But I will say that, we have so many stories and so many artists that we just couldn't fit into the 8 hours. I mean, if you were to look at just what's on the cutting room floor, there's just so much material. And I mean, talk about an endless topic. I mean, the history of recorded music is kind of one of those stories that just keeps on giving. So absolutely, we'd love to do more. I think the response has been really overwhelmingly positive. When we've looked on, social media and the kind of comments and the feedback, it's really encouraging because I think it's really struck a chord with a lot of people, and I think it's a nice moment to reflect on music when there's so much other crazy news going on in the world. I think everybody's happy to take a break and really dive into a show that's just about celebrating music and artistry and people coming together. So I think we're really, hopeful that we will, move forward with new seasons and new iterations, and we have loads and loads more stories to tell. And for your second question, we do have a really great partnership with the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation and the Grammy Museum to get Soundbreaking out to schools all over the country. We felt as we were making this series that there is really a fantastic opportunity for music education with these shows and the stories that are told, and they really fit so well into programs, in schools around music and also around arts in general. So we've developed a number of curriculum, which includes excerpts and clips from the series tied with lesson plans that really talk about what's happening with that music, why it works so well, and just a little bit both of the nuts and bolts, but also the human stories and the creative process that's driving what you're hearing.
Well, it is such a wonderful series. Soundbreaking is its name. It's so well thought out, and it's nice to hear about the educational component because I think that's important in this. We're very hopeful for more of your stories. This has just been a fantastic series. I'm looking forward to watching the rest of it. I can just encourage my audience to just jump in and find this. It is just absolutely wonderful. And Joshua Bennett, it's been a treat to talk to you. Thank you. And if a second season comes out, we'd love to have you back.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's been a real pleasure. And, thank you for all your support and keep watching.
Absolutely, will do. Joshua, thank you again.